Welcome to a Community Partners interview where we explore the organization's opportunities and resources that look to make change in our daily lives. I'm your host, Sean Pickard, and you're listening to Voices for Ability Radio, all abilities, all the time. Today, I'm joined by Paula Boutis from Inclusion Action Ontario. Inclusion Action Ontario furthers the well-being of exceptional children through improved education opportunities. They facilitate the inclusion of persons with exceptionalities into all aspects of life. Inclusion Action Ontario provides support for parents, relatives, and friends of exceptional children and adults. They also provide educational opportunities and information on issues related to inclusion. Thank you for joining us today. Paula, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you for having me.
Oh, it's good to have you here and learn a little bit more about Inclusion Action Ontario. But before we get going too far here, what is the Paula Boutis story? Tell me a little bit about you. What inspired you to work at Inclusion Action Ontario, and why work with individuals with disabilities?
Sure. So I am a parent of a child with disabilities, and my introduction into the world of disabilities really um, more intensely began with that, though I do have a cousin who's probably in her 60s now with Down syndrome. So I did grow up with disability around me and saw what a wonderful life she had in an inclusive community in Greece. And then when I had my own daughter, and she has different disability, she's got a disability known as Angelman syndrome, a fairly mild version of it, but it got me to know that community and to be looking at disability issues more intensely, I guess we'll say. And early on, I had an interest in seeing her live an inclusive life, including in her school environment. And I got to know the volunteers and folks over at Inclusion Action Ontario. It had a different name then, but it's had an organizational history of about 30 plus years. And we can talk about more of that later. But I ended up volunteering for them, and the organization itself is primarily volunteers, so we are looking to establish some more support with contractors. Mostly it's parents like me who are supporting other parents and families. We do have some self-advocates on the board of directors as well, and we are looking to become more involved, not just in the education space, but also more directly in community through partners in employment and recreation opportunities for persons with disabilities.
Partners with employment and recreational opportunities, those are two huge things that I'm sure we're going to be talking about here very soon. But before we get into that, let's talk about how Inclusion Action Ontario got started. What was the impetus to bring this about?
Sure, it's history, which I was not around for, but as I'll do my best to convey it. We do have a member and access to members who were around in the early days, and they evolved out of a group of parents with children who had very complex needs. And there was a time in the history of Ontario where there was no legal right for students with disabilities to attend school at all. And those families lobbied hard to get a system in place where their children would be accepted in the education system. Before those laws came into force, there were school boards that were offering education, but in highly segregated ways, but which still persists today in those school boards, particularly the Toronto boards. But in any event, there was at least a place people could send their kids to, and then, but those families weren't really satisfied with the idea that their children belonged in separate special places or separate special schools. And sometime in the 90s, there was, I think, a push amongst those families through legal actions to push the envelope and the policy making. And we have seen some improvements, but truly the largest improvements we saw were around the mid 90s now, both through litigation and legislative reform. So that is the history of the organization.
And I actually remember those changes in the late 80s, early 90s when integration was
Mhm.
becoming the thing. I actually remember that happening. So It's good to see that we've come so far from that time, actually.
We have in some ways and not in so much in others, but we definitely
Very
have.
true. Very true. Very, very true there. Now, I've heard a little bit about recreation. I've heard about employment, and I've heard about education. So there's a couple different things you've got on the go there. Is there anything else that really highlights what Inclusion Action Ontario is all about?
I think those are the three main areas that we work on. What's really important about us compared to a lot of the disability spaces that parents get directed to is that it's actually parent led and family led. So we are deeply involved in school boards through special education advisory committees. And those committees are supposed to be made up of local associations of parents who are focused on the well-being of students with exceptionalities. Those committees outside of the GTA unfortunately don't often reflect parent voices at all, and they've become conflated with agencies and service providers, and the parent voice is lacking, if not a lot. And there's been a lot of confusion through school boards about what those committees are really intended to do, especially out of the GTA. So I'd say those three areas are the main ones, and also because we have a seat at the table with several boards in the province right now, we also are embedded that way with parent advocates on these committees who can then connect with at least families who are in those boards. For those families where we don't have people in a board, we nonetheless still try and help them navigate their board and offer them some support best as we can.
And that's a huge thing that you've got on the go there, the parents being included in all this, because they're the ones dealing with this on a daily basis, right? They have their children. They're trying to find the best future possible for their children. And that actually started a lot of organizations in Ontario, anyways, just having the parents at that table.
It did.
So it's really good to see you doing that. Now, I spent some time on your website here, Paula, and I've got to say, I've got a few questions, shall we say.
Sure.
Well, let's start with the chapters. There are a number of different chapters of Inclusion Action Ontario. What's the purpose behind the chapters? How does that work? Help me understand.
Sure. So to participate in special education advisory committees, the legislative framework requires us to have active chapters in the local area of the school board. And so where we have volunteers who would like to be sitting members of those committees in their school board, we establish chapters. It's not hard to establish a chapter. We only require 2 members to be active. And then we are, once we satisfy all the hoops for a particular school board, write all the right letters and say all the right qualifications, we're then in a position to have a member sit on their special education advisory committee. But even in the absence of a seat, we like to have parents available who are local to their jurisdictions, because nobody knows a board better than the people who've had to be in it. And so notwithstanding that there's, a legislative framework that applies to all of them, every board has its own culture, its own special education plan, its own way of doing things. And no one knows that better than the parents in the board. So we try through an active chapter network to have those people on the ground in those areas, so that when we get the phone calls, we have the best person available to them to direct them to.
So you're getting a lot of good information from these chapters, being able to basically get a good look at what's going on in the education system across the province.
At least insofar as we have those. I mean, there are 72 boards in the province, and we have about a half a dozen. But it's still, it ironically, I'm not really sure if that's the right word for it, but all the boards that have recently been taken over by the province, we have representatives in every single one of those. And there's 5. So I don't know what that says, but maybe we're finding our way to the right boards, if you know what I mean, the ones that really need the presence.
It sounds like you're finding your way to the boards that need presence. I love how you worded that.
So yeah, that's how our chapters work. And like I said, it's really important to us to find people on the ground locally to support other families.
Absolutely, because now you know exactly what's going on in in each jurisdiction. So that is awesome to hear. Now, also on the website, you have a resources tab. Let's talk about that. What can someone find when they click on the resources tab?
Wow, that resources tab was developed over a couple of years. Um, I was actually the primary author of it, though I worked with a number of others and they reviewed my draft. So we split it up into a number of areas. It's primarily focused right now on resources for the education piece as opposed to recreation or employment, but over time we hope to improve that too. So one of the things we wanted to be able to do is not just have all this information live in somebody's head, but that people, can find it and read our hopefully accessible and understandable resources and then use that information with or without actually being able to connect with one of us. So my background, I'm actually a lawyer by training, and I am a practicing lawyer, though not in this area. But I did, as a result of that background, I spent a lot of time trying to teach myself education law and then put it on this website. So part of what you find there is a primer on education law with a particular view to people who have an interest in inclusive education practices. We also have um, actual research papers that reflect good inclusive education practices. What does that look like? How can you make it work? What are the barriers? Occasional publications that we come across regarding ableism and in academic settings and research about special education needs. And then also how to be an advocate. So, one of our most recent additions to our advocacy in school section was the Parents Supporting Parents online resource, which was developed with the University of Western Ontario. And it's basically a self training online module for families. It gives you an opportunity to work through problems and read scenarios and ways people were able to advocate. And this was based on interviews, extensive interviews with families, as well as the people who were, who are familiar with inclusive education and that faculty at the University of Western Ontario.
So you were getting the information directly from the source in that case.
We were, yeah. We had extensive interviews with families.
Oh, I love hearing that. Not related or not based on someone else's opinion that has nothing to do with it. That is awesome. Now, when it comes to the services at Inclusion Action Ontario, are there any restrictions? Is it over 18 only, a certain disability type? This program is caregivers and family members only, things of that nature. Are there any restrictions?
Certainly, there are no age restrictions. We will, and there are actually no disability type restrictions either. Our purpose in life is really just full inclusion. We don't care what your particular disability is or what your age is, and so we'll support families in any way we can. We obviously, as volunteers, are limited in our ability to be at all the tables, but strategic advice, directing to resources, and to some degree, what we spend our time on reflects who the current volunteers are. So most recently, we have two new additions to our board who are particularly interested in the recreation piece and the employment piece, and so that's what's going to give us the boost about to create the resources there. And it's really our focus from an education perspective has only ever been two things: human rights and accommodations. And we're not focused on the exceptionalities per se, as those are defined on the Education Act. We have to be to meet the definition for a local association, be able to sit on those committees. Uh, but we do it for that reason, not because our focus is specific to a type of just exceptionality. It's not. We will work with any family that wants an inclusive education experience.
And that is so important today.
Yeah.
That education can just, it can open so many doors, right? There's just so much that can happen. And since we're talking about education,
Mhm.
Let's talk about a success story, Paula. Without using any names, can you share with me a story about what happened? What supports were put in place when someone asked for help?
Sure. I mean, it's we don't follow families sort of from beginning to end, but I can certainly let you know that to the extent we have folks available to attend at meetings, which they choose to do on a volunteer basis with families, our families are consistently able to then obtain their goals for inclusion much more easily. So the thing to understand about school boards, most school boards, a very small minority of them believe in a model or accept what I'll call the human rights social justice model of education. Rather, they're much more focused on the medical model of diagnosing and separating and therapizing everyone. So, so we have a hard go most of the time with school boards and trying to get them to understand the move away from that. And notwithstanding all the discussion around inclusive education, there is a deeply ableist view around that, and that often the families themselves don't even want it. Many of them really fallen into the belief of their children are better off in specialized places. And there's a number of reasons for that. But, our focus is on the families who want the help to keep their kids with the general education space and the regular classroom and to be properly supported there. So we will often attend meetings, and that often, we'll get a kid moved from a special education class into a regular classroom. We'll assist the families to understand their rights and obligations when it comes to support for children. How does the budgeting work? What is the obligation of the school? And we've certainly been able to help families either move into an inclusive space or get the resources that they are legally entitled to. And not because we're a legal entity, we don't go to court, but just knowing the right language and reminding parents, because the misinformation that families are given is astonishing. I mean, one of the families told me that she was told, I don't know if it was by the superintendent or someone else in some board, that they had the right to decide which the teacher did or the principal did or the superintendent, something like that. An individual had the right to decide where the placement for their child would be. And that couldn't be further from the truth. There is an entire committee that must be convened, and a legal decision is made, and there are appeal rights if families do not want their children in whatever placement that committee decides. So it is remarkable that you would still have families today being told by senior administrators who gets to make what decision. So we're there to intervene when it comes to that sort of thing. The other place we really intervened with is trying to help families who've been excluded or suspended or who have modified days, which is disproportionate to students with disabilities. So that's been another area where we've worked with the schools to get their kids back in to school and work out some kind of solution for these children who've been told to stay home.
Let's take a quick moment here, Paula. Let's talk about modified days. For any of the folks that don't out there that don't know what that phrase means, can you help them? Let's
Yeah,
talk about modified days.
sure. So under the Education Act, if your child has been identified, which is a terrible term, but if they have been identified with an exceptionality, and the exceptionalities, deal with communication, intellectual disability, they also include giftedness. That is the one exceptionality we don't work with at all, unless they have a disability related exceptionality. Um, so if you have an exceptionality and you're identified that way, the school board is entitled to reduce the length of your school day. So every other student has a legal right to be in school. I think it's 5 hours a day. I can't remember, but whatever it is, there is a number of hours a day that every other student has a legal right to be in, unless you're a student with a disability, and then somebody can say you don't have to be there all at the same number of hours. You know, so we now, whether or not those students are formally identified, schools will often tell families with kids with disabilities to come pick up their children early, or will only allow them to stay 15 minutes a day. I mean, I've heard this 15 minutes a day. We don't have the necessary EA support today. And some of our website does address that. That is just not legal. Like, they cannot just require you to come pick up your child. But it's even worse once your child is actually identified, because then they do have a legal right to reduce the instructional length of the day. Some boards have policies so that it's not completely random. Like, what does that really mean? How does that work? And some boards don't. So it is one of those Wild West places where you just need an advocate to force the board to work on a strategy to have the kid be in school, because a lot of parents give up jobs when things like this start to happen, and it's mostly mothers.
There's two things that stick out to me here, Paula. One being they decide when the child goes home. And then let's go back a little bit to what you said earlier, where there was one administrator who felt they could decide where the child goes. I'm hearing an awful lot of people just having ego.
It could be ego. I don't know. It is astonishing either way because of how illegal and wrong it is. There is certainly. I mean, it's very distressing, obviously, when administrators are so wrong about the information that they provide families, and most families do not have the knowledge to know differently. So, when somebody like I come along, or another person like me, comes along and can say, no, that's not the law. Here's the law. We want you to follow it. So it really makes it really changes the tone of the conversation. So I don't know if it's egos or people who legitimately don't know, or they've just gotten so used to having all the authority and no pushback that they even believe it. I don't know.
There is a lot there. There are a lot of things it could be. But let's talk about events, right? There's got to be fundraisers or annual AGM, things like that. What's going on at Inclusion Action Ontario? Are there any events that people should know about?
Well, we don't have any events currently planned, but we are looking to plan some in the new year. We have some funding for parent workshops, which we will be working with. So one of the things we have a couple of funds that are we'll call them legacy funds. One is the Matthew Dolmage Fund, and the other is the Gabe West Fund. And the Gabe West Fund these are in the honor of two people who've since died and lived inclusive lives, and had champions as families to help them do that. And the funds in the Gabe West one are intended to support families who want adult lives that are self-directed, with as much independence as possible. The Dolmage funds are the ones we'll be using for improving recreational opportunities for kids to participate in camps that are truly inclusive camps. So no different, not a special camp for kids with disabilities, but a regular camp where all kids can go and be properly supported. So those are the two funds we have. We do intend to start doing some more direct fundraising for those to support those activities, both this summer through the camps, and then through some parent workshops on planning for that inclusive future and life. Those are two things we're going to be doing. And additionally, we're going to be starting to fundraise to support an intern and ideally a more permanent contractor who can support families more regularly than we can just as volunteers. So those will be posting on our website and looking for funds to be directed to those goals. And usually we get a little something, towards the end of the year, and through the summer we have two different fundraising campaigns we do as Direct Ask. We out of the blue, a foundation that we never heard of just started sending us $10,000. So every year, so we've been getting that. I don't know what we did to impress them. They have no presence that we can reach them directly through. But we send them a thank you letter every year, and I hope that they will continue to find our work of value and support it.
I hope they're able to find that value in it as well. But from what I'm hearing, shouldn't be a problem.
Thank you.
Now let's talk about Inclusion Action Ontario for a second, where if someone wanted to become a member, they need some help, or if someone wanted to volunteer, what is the process for reaching out and getting a hold of someone at Inclusion Action Ontario for both being a member and a volunteer?
So we do have a site, a membership link that people can just join online, and it's free actually for students or self advocates, and for families it's $30. And for organizational members, we do have some that's $60 membership, and of course it's all tax receivable. So there's charitable tax receipt issued if you purchase it online, and manually if you send us an e-transfer or a check. In terms of volunteering, really any way you can get to us. So mostly just drop us an email is the easiest way, and then we will respond. And for instance, we're always looking for new board members every year. There's a little bit of turnover, one or two new faces, and the board is a good way to be involved. And otherwise, you come to us, and we sort of try and find a way that works for you, whether that's writing a blog or being available to mentor. Others, we always try to find ways. Pretty much anybody who has an interest in disability and inclusion, we can find a way for you to be involved.
That is so good to hear. Now we're going to move into my favorite question here, Paula. What's the one thing you see happening over and over again to individuals with disabilities that shouldn't be, and how do we stop it?
I could say this across all environments. So whether we're talking about education or employment or recreation, it's the othering and not really using the person with the disability as their own expert in their needs. So I have close friends, adults who have significant disabilities in some cases, and they're trying to navigate the workplace. I have, of course, the families we see. There's a real sense, as I said, to medicalize everything and insist that the only people who know the right answers are everybody except the person with the disability. And in part, that is because of how our code works. Our human rights code established a duty to accommodate, but the person with the disability cannot dictate what that means. So the employer or the school board has to say, all right, well, this is the need, this is how we intend to meet that disability related need. It feels very, I'm not sure if I have the right way to describe it, but it feels a bit like people force you to beg. There's something very undignified about a system that is supposed to be all about the dignity of people and with disabilities. Very undignified because it's requiring you to prove a need, and then other people tell you how to best resolve that need. So you have to have experts write you reports, that kind of thing. It's not enough for the family or the student to just say, "This is my need. This is a solution that I think would work." So it becomes a very expensive process and long process. And so by the time people have gotten a need looked at, potentially resolved, the need may have even changed, right? Because not all of us, many people with disabilities, the needs change. They change a lot. Right? You can have potentially a degenerative situation, or you sometimes need an accommodation and you sometimes don't. And those are actually the hardest ones to get to work in a school board, because and then or otherwise, and then people also they project their own completely flawed understanding of your disability. Oh, well, it doesn't seem that bad. Well, how would you know if you don't live with the disability that I live with, right? There's a lot of the projection and deep, like I said, deeply ingrained ableism, and a sense that people with disabilities are getting something special and that is, I think, the biggest barrier, is this notion that they're getting something special rather than merely being given an even level playing field.
Yeah, some people do resent the accommodations, don't they?
They do. They really do.
Now, for all our listeners out there who have never heard of Inclusion Action Ontario before, what is the one thing that everybody needs to know about Inclusion Action Ontario?
Our focus is to ensure as an inclusive life as possible in all facets of a person's life. And we don't, like I said, we don't care what your type of disability is. We will try to find you resources to help you achieve that goal. And um, I would love to work us out of a job someday. I'd love to see that this just becomes the way things are and that the advocacy is no longer necessary.
Wouldn't that be nice? Work yourself out of a job in this situation. I love that one, Paula. I love that one. Now, we are running out of time, but we got to make sure that folks at home have what they need to get a hold of you. So if folks are looking for more information, they want to touch base, how can they get a hold of you? We're talking website, 1-800 number. What have you got?
Sure. The best way is to look at our website, which is inclusionactionontario.ca. You can send us an email. There's lots of little forms you can fill out depending on your interest. Join the newsletter, interest in volunteering. There's little places along as you navigate the website where you can fill in a form. If you want to call, you can call. That just goes to me, Paula Boutis. It's my number, but I will get back to you and we will get back to you. Sometimes it takes us a little while. But there is a lot of information too on the website, so hopefully it's accessible. We have had a few people test it out for us, and we hope as accessible as it can be for people to navigate. And happy to help.
That sounds awesome. Thank you very much, Paula. We are running out of time, though, so would you like to say goodbye to the folks at home?
Yes, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Paula Boutis from Inclusion Action Ontario. That's all the time we have for today. I'm Sean Pickard. Until next time, bye for now.